Environmental news now, and great concern about New Mexico's groundwater. Is the state doing enough to protect it? Simon Thompson investigates.
This is Dairy Row. 10 concentrated animal feeding operations lining I-10 just south of Las Cruces, each pumping out an estimated $5.8 million worth of milk every single year. According to New Mexico State University, New Mexico dairies generate $180 million in economic impact annually in Doña County alone. But that's not all they're producing. In New Mexico, dairy farms discharge 6.4 million gallons of waste and feces every day. That's equivalent to the waste generated by about 800,000 people. Rio Grande Sierra Club Conservation Coordinator Dan Lorimer says when dairy farms don't handle this animal discharge properly by lining waste pits and discharge lagoons, or too much of the waste is used to fertilize neighboring crops, it ends up seeping into the soil and contaminating the groundwater.
Well, the quality of our groundwater is highly important to us. We are an arid state, we're in a drought, and we need to protect this very limited resource.
Groundwater is where 90% of New Mexicans like Victor Montoya get their water. He lives downhill from Dairy Row in Anthony, New Mexico.
And I lived there my entire life too, and I didn't know that well was contaminated. And I was drinking water out of that well. Well, my entire neighborhood was. And nobody told us it was contaminated. We kept drinking out of it.
New Mexico Environment Department Water Studies and Monitoring revealed high levels of nitrates in Anthony, New Mexico's well water. The Environmental Protection Agency says nitrates can cause blue baby syndrome. As oxygen is limited, babies vomit, have seizures, and even die. Dan Lorimer has worked with some Anthony families who have settled with dairies following court cases and are not able to speak about it on camera. A Nebraska study found high levels of nitrates in well water increased risks of some cancers, like non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which Montoya's son Colton battled 3 years ago.
My wife cut his hair, and then all of a sudden it was like a mosquito bite. And the mosquito bite just kept growing and growing until a point where it was a bump here, a bump here, and a bump here. And one of the most powerless moments in your life as a father is holding your son, knowing the fact that you can't do nothing about that pain.
Other studies have found the nitrate link to cancer to be inconclusive. In 2011, New Mexico enacted regulations to protect groundwater from dairy waste contamination. Lorimer says the waste infrastructure standards and water monitoring policies are on par with many other states, but implementing the rules poses increased expense to the dairy industry. Lorimer says since Susana Martinez became governor, the Environment Department has not been enforcing the rules. Martinez disputes that and says she also has a responsibility to boost the economy.
And you can have some really onerous regulations that provide no result. That's what impacts our economy. So we have two responsibilities: making sure our economy is strong and that the regulations that are in place keep our environment safe and clean, but doesn't cause such a burden on our economy that we end up losing jobs to other states.
Recent New Mexico Environment Department data indicates that more than 60% of the state's dairies are polluting groundwater. The department's public information officer declined an interview with KRWG, and the dairy farmers of New Mexico didn't respond to interview requests. But both are expected to appear at meetings at the end of the year with proposed revisions to the dairy regulations. Lorimer says if those changes are approved, it will only further compromise New Mexico's scarce water resources.
The science that supported the rules that are on the book hasn't been superseded by new science.
Montoya says while the state is not enforcing the law, the community is working to protect its water. Through grants and a minor tax increase, Anthony, New Mexico has been able to secure a $12 million reverse osmosis system that purifies the city's municipal water.
Ms. Martinez needs to think about the future in New Mexico with the limited water we have and the limited space and land we have. And if she's willing to sell our soul to the highest bidder, then she's going to have to live with the responsibility of the communities.
Montoya says the dairy industry may be a major source of economic activity, but it's operating at the expense of communities like his. For KRWG, I'm Simon Thompson. Today, like most days, when he's not working a shift at Coles, Harry Kurgans is sitting in front of his laptop trying to find a better job.
All that was available were part-time positions. So, having not worked for several years, I was glad to get anything.
Before he came to Las Cruces, Kurgans owned and operated a successful office coffee vending machine business, which he sold before working a string of salaried marketing jobs between LA and Chicago. That was until the economy took a turn for the worse.
The corporations started cutting their budgets, and the first one that was usually cut was marketing.
Out of work and out of money, Kurgans didn't have any other option but to move in with his mom in Las Cruces. He's been a sales associate at Coles for little over a year now.
I enjoy my work. I work just as hard as if I was making 3 times, 4 times as much. And it's hard to live on minimum wage. Minimum wage doesn't buy what it used to.
According to Communities in Action and Faith, or CAFE, Kurgans is one of 18,000 people in Las Cruces working for close to $7.50 an hour, having difficulty making ends meet. The group is campaigning to increase the Las Cruces minimum wage to $10.10 an hour by 2017. Vincent Vocaro owns the Las Cruces Italian restaurant Lorenzo's. He says most of his employees already earn more than the minimum wage, but he's concerned some local businesses won't be able to absorb the increase Cafe is proposing.
I will probably cut my hours, 15 hours a week. I will let at least 4 people go in staff, and prices would definitely go up just to survive.
Vocaro says a large minimum wage increase would make some businesses less willing to hire young and low-skilled workers, making it harder for them to break into the workforce. So Vocaro and some other business people have proposed a minimum wage increase to $8.50 an hour over 2 years. Many low-income workers receive benefits from the government, like food stamps. New Mexico State University Professor of Economics Chris Erickson says that means employers paying low wages are subsidized by the government.
Employer can get away with paying less because of these subsidies their employees are receiving. So by raising the minimum wage, you make the employer pay the true costs of that worker.
Erickson says even though businesses will see more money going out their doors in the form of higher wages, he says they're just as likely to see just as much coming in.
Those low-income workers tend to spend every dollar they receive, and that can increase demand in the economy.
Still, Erickson says when minimum wages increase, small businesses like Lorenzo's are hit much harder. Smaller merchants risk losing customers to bigger businesses that have deeper pockets and can deal with wage increases without having to cut back hours or raise prices. Vocaro says local businesses have already been competing with as many as 16 chain stores that moved into Las Cruces last year.
Mom and pops go out of business. We're going to have the homogenized city again with only chain restaurants that the money goes out of the city. I mean, it comes down to economics, but there won't be a flavor of Las Cruces anymore.
$10.10 per hour is a fraction of what Kurgans was earning before he started working in Las Cruces. Though he's looking forward to some more money and flexibility, for him, it's as much a question of dignity and principle as it is one of financial security.
You know, to be told that what you're making now is enough. You know, you're not worth any more than that, because it'll affect our profit line. It's not a great feeling.
If a $10.10 minimum wage is approved in Las Cruces, the city will have one of the highest pay levels for low-income workers in the country. For KRWG, I'm Simon Thompson. Single parent Cassandra Callway supports her 2 teenage daughters by working at Cracker Barrel in Las Cruces. Because she's studying for a master's in social work, Callway can only work part-time.
You make $7.50 an hour, a box of cereal is $4, and a gallon of gas is $3.39. You're working 1 hour for that.
Callway gets $300 in government assistance for each of her daughters. She says combined with her earnings, they live off anywhere between $900 and $1,600 a month. But even in a good month, that would still leave the single income family of 3 living just below the poverty line. Callway says her work situation is likely to improve once she graduates. But that's not going to be for another 3 years, and she's concerned about the effect on her daughter's education and opportunities.
School supplies every year are horribly expensive. And then they get to school and then there's a whole nother list, you know? What do we want?
There are 2 proposals to raise the minimum wage in Las Cruces, but only the one proposed by CAFE, Communities in Action and Faith, would raise the tipped minimum wage from $2.13 to $6.06 by 2017. When tipped wage workers' base wage and tipped earnings combined don't add up to the minimum wage, employers are federally mandated to cover the difference. City Council members Miguel Silva and Ciel Levantino have proposed a much smaller increase. Their plan would increase the wage to $8.50 by 2016. And if tipped workers did not earn this amount from their base wage and tips, the shortfall would still have to be made up by their employer. New Mexico State University economics professor Chris Erickson.
We don't need to do it by raising the tip minimum wage, but rather by raising the amount that they're guaranteed to make per hour, which is the minimum wage, not the tip minimum wage.
But Callway says the councillor's plan is not so straightforward. She says servers at Cracker Barrel sometimes perform other duties, during which they can't earn tips.
Let's say you were there 3 hours and you made $50. You've met the minimum for the day. So you won't get paid the extra for those 2 hours that you were not on the floor, because you've made the minimum wage requirement for 5 hours.
Callway says a higher base wage, closer to $6, means employees would be adequately compensated for work when they can't earn tips. But Dickerson Group restaurant owner Marcy Dickerson says most of her tipped wage workers already earn far more than the minimum wage.
My average waitress pulls in $1,000 a week. That's $52,000 a year.
Erickson says a higher tipped minimum wage probably would not damage the larger chains, but could hurt independent restaurants.
Often they end up not being able to expand or even shrinking their business a little bit, whereas the large chains, because they have deeper pockets, are able to take advantage of that and gain market share.
Dickerson says the higher tipped minimum wage would take away opportunities from servers moving up and working hard to hone their skills.
50 new jobs are being brought to this town, in addition to the money that we're going to spend in the construction. Those types of things will not be possible. That expansion will not be possible. The extra employment will not be possible if we are taxed to the point and we are overburdened to the point that there's no money left.
Dickerson says the onus is on lower skilled tipped wage earners to improve their skills and experience to find better opportunities. Callway has been serving at Cracker Barrel for 5 years and has considered getting a job at a more expensive restaurant, but the night hours required would have kept her away from her teenage daughters.
You know, I'll never own a brand new car or never own a house of my own, but I'm going to make sure that the girls do. And that's the goal now, is to make it better as we go on, you know, to kind of stop the circle of poverty.
For KRWG, I'm Simon Thompson.
We begin this week with a Silver City restaurant that's getting national attention for its cuisine, some of which comes from the New Mexico wild. Simon Thompson reports from the forest and the kitchen.
Chef Rob Connolly is walking through the Gila National Forest, looking for ingredients for tonight's menu at his restaurant, The Curious Kumquat in Silver City.
I just know so many chefs who, they sit in that kitchen all day, every day, breathing in the smoke and working the long hours. And for me, it's just the food's so connected to the land.
Foraged plants like stinging nettles, hackberries and amaranth make up about 40% of Connolly's dinner menu. But right now, Connolly is digging cattails out of the ground.
Oh, so I peeled this one way back for you.
So just bite the whole thing?
Yeah. If it's tender enough to bite, it's tender enough to chew.
Okay. It's kind of like fettuccine or something.
It's like a cucumber fettuccine.
Yeah.
And so that comment, that's a great example of how I get ideas for the menu.
6 years ago, the Curious Kumquat was a locavore restaurant. When Connolly came across some research on how Apaches in the region years and years ago were feeding themselves, he started cooking with foods like acorns, wild grasses, seeds and cattails.
That led me to a nice little palette of food that I could pull out of the woods myself.
Connolly says finding and foraging food is one thing, but preparing and serving it to paying customers at a high-end restaurant takes an inventive, even untried, approach to cooking. After years of being open and a string of reviews in some of food's most prestigious magazines like Saveur, the Curious Kumquat has become a seminal destination restaurant.
We've been getting a lot from Seattle and Portland, a lot from the Bay Area, San Francisco, and a lot from the Northeast, still from the New York Times article.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's bizarre. Like, we never dreamed it would be like this. We're just a little restaurant in the middle of nowhere.
A lot of Connolly's time is spent driving and trekking into national parks, where wild food hasn't been exposed to traffic, industry and air pollution. He says it's New Mexico's sparse, spread out population and lack of development that makes it one of the more ideal places in the country to serve and source foraged food.
You can find foraged food restaurants in most major cities, okay? But should we be eating that food? And so if I can push the ethic that says there really is only a couple places in the US that we should even consider eating food pulled out of the wilderness, then I think that has an impact economically on this region of the state and ultimately the state.
But the New Mexico Environment Department says serving foraged foods is a public health concern and goes against regulations. They declined to be interviewed, but in a statement said, for the protection of public health, all food sold and served to the public must be procured from an approved source.
What is an approved source? If I pick up a phone and say, get me amaranth, no one can get me amaranth. I can go in a 10-minute drive and get amaranth. The vast majority of my ingredients, hackberry, amaranth, nettle, these are not things you can buy. They don't exist to be purchased, but they're known to be safe food sources.
Still, the food code the New Mexico Environment Department is charged with enforcing doesn't specifically mention foods that have been foraged, except for wild mushrooms, which can be foraged and served by restaurants that have been approved to do so. But New Mexico is yet to adopt this part of the code or any related licensing mechanism. Connolly says he hopes it and equivalent procedures can be developed to allow restaurants to bring New Mexico's pristine wilderness to the table without having to operate in a regulatory gray area.
And policymakers don't have the time to invest, and I don't know that they should be investing. They do need to protect my customers, but they also need to be able to support systems that are different than the big systems.
He says he consults and works with professors in the field and documents his foraging to be in check with what he thinks wild food policy would look like. For KRWG, I'm Simon Thompson.
So you turn it on, let it run for a while, turn it off, look and see if anything's coming.
Pig trapper Lewis Reeves is using an electronic pig collar. He says letting off a piglet in distress call is one of the fastest ways to get a good shot at a feral female pig.
Right now, I've caught all the dumb ones. Now I'm working on the smart ones, and they get smart in a hurry.
Reeves says feral pigs are having as many as 3 litters every year. As Otero County Wildlife Services specialist, it's Reeves' job to keep those numbers down. As a one-man operation, Reeves drives around the county and the Lincoln National Forest, setting up cage traps, outdoor cameras and rancid bait, where he sees the tracks and signs of feral pigs.
We fill this bait tube up with corn and then pour strawberry soda pop on it. We'll anchor it to a post or a stake in the ground.
Reeves says around these parts, strawberry soda is a feral pig favourite. When even that doesn't get them into traps, Reeves takes to the forest, usually at night, armed with a semi-automatic rifle and night vision gear. Otero County wasn't always so concerned with exterminating feral pigs. Reeves says the animals have been roaming the Lincoln National Forest since people started releasing them into the wild for hunting 30 to 40 years ago. Releasing pigs into the wild is now illegal in New Mexico, but Reeves says that hasn't curbed the population. The bigger it gets, the more they are threatening livestock and ranching in the area.
They turn all the grass, everything that's growing, they turn it upside down. As soon as the sun comes out the next morning, bakes those roots, it don't grow back.
Ranchers like Gary Stone graze their cattle on those grasses. Stone's family has been ranching for 5 generations.
If you take the grasses out, then the only thing you're looking at is feedlot type, and you do away with the natural beef, the natural grass-fed beef, that what people are wanting.
Stone is the president of the Otero County Cattle Ranchers Association. He says the more grasses and pastures feral pigs dig up and destroy, the more liquid feeds and protein supplements they have to buy to feed out to their cattle. And a lot of the time, it's the feral pigs that end up eating it.
They would come in on that liquid feed and just actually move the cows off of it.
Pig trapper Lewis Reeves says the pigs will eat absolutely anything, from grubs in the mud to baby birds. They've even been known to kill baby calves off the ranches.
It's hard to prove because when they do, they eat the whole thing. So you've almost got to witness what's going on.
But feral pigs may pose an even bigger threat. The animals can carry as many as 32 serious diseases. And because they're drinking from the same waterholes and troughs as cattle, Gary Stone says a lot of those diseases can easily be transmitted to livestock.
These diseases through the water or through the feed get into our cattle. They have a potential to pretty much shut the livestock industry down.
Take brucellosis. Cattle infected can lose weight, become lame, and even lose their calves. Reeves works with the ranchers. When he traps and kills a feral pig, he takes blood samples and sends them off to the USDA for testing, so ranchers know what vaccines they need to protect their cattle. And those vaccines are crucial. Reeves says all it takes is one infected cow to create a problem for all the ranchers in the area.
If you come up positive on brucellosis, your neighbor that has a common fence and has cattle next to your cattle, he's quarantined until he gets a clean test.
Reeves says it takes up to a year before a ranch is allowed to sell cattle again after being quarantined. He adds there's only so much that hunting and trapping can do in the mountainous and dense forest in Otero County. He's hoping a feral pig poison under EPA evaluation will be approved. The poison has been successful in eradicating feral pigs in Australia and New Zealand. But with officials saying that approval process could take as long as 5 years, it may not come soon enough. For KRWG, I'm Simon Thompson.